From the CISO Series, it's cybersecurity headlines.
Cisco announces breach of multi-factor authentication message provider. Bad bots drive up account takeover attack numbers. And the Microsoft email breach keeps getting worse. These are some of the stories that my colleagues and I have selected from this past week's cybersecurity headlines, like a virtual produce department of cybersecurity news. We've gone around, we found the ripest, the choicest stories, and now we are ready for some insight, opinion, and expertise from our returning guest, Dan Walsh, the CISO over at Paxos. Dan, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate your time.
It's great to be here.
Fantastic. Rest assured, David Cross, we have a guest today. Don't worry, we're all good. We're gonna have a good time. We want to thank, before we move on to the news, our sponsor for today is Conveyor, market-leading AI for automating customer security reviews. Remember to join us on YouTube Live, just like David Cross over here in our chat. Go to CISOseries.com, hit the events drop-down, and look for the cybersecurity headlines week in review image. Just click on it to join us, and you can get in there and contribute in the chat. Let us know what's on your mind, what you're thinking about the news stories. If you have any questions about what we're covering and what we're talking about, we would love to hear from you. So get involved in the chat, and we'll be talking to you. We've got about 20 minutes though, so let's jump into the news. First up here, Cisco announces breach of multi-factor authentication message provider. One of the providers used by Cisco to send multi-factor authentication messages was breached by a threat actor, no foolin', on April 1st. According to an email sent from Cisco to its customers, the breach occurred in a telephony supplier to an MFA company, Duo, which Cisco actually acquired in 2018. The attacker used the credentials of an employee of that telephone supplier, which it allegedly obtained through a phishing attack. Duo has more than 40,000 customers and offers its services to state and federal government agencies, as well as school districts and universities. So a lot of targets. And when we're talking about some of the more high-profile customers, we're talking about Lyft, Yelp, Box, and Amerigas. So Dan, another story of a third-party vendor vulnerability coming through the supply chain to bite, in this case, Cisco on the behind. I guess that's the point. Do you see this becoming a run-of-the-mill attack path? And if so, I guess what greater dangers do you see other than a brief mea culpa from Cisco?
I mean, we're seeing what I would call cybersecurity infrastructure getting breached all the time, right? In the fall, there was the Okta breach. And so I think this is just, standard. And if you're a large cybersecurity provider like Cisco, I think this is just what's going to happen. So I think this will continue to be a run-of-the-mill attack, particularly if it's, now that a lot of things are MFA'd. The MFA now is becoming the target versus just the regular credentials. So I think this is going to continue as business as usual, and we're going to see more of these attacks.
It's interesting, yeah, to see that kind of as MFA has become the standard. That now, we've seen. We've seen more direct attacks, much further down the pipeline, but to kind of go to the source, that at least was novel to me. But certainly, this kind of larger attacking larger systems, right, and finding those weak points and finding those points of exploitation, yeah, increasingly just seems to be threat acting as normal, I guess, for lack of a better term.
That's right. And how did they do it? They got it from a supplier. So they fished an employee of a telephone supplier, and then they pivoted and went after the MFA SMS. So again, it's where's the weakest link? Let's attack that, and hopefully it can get us to something bigger, which in this case it did.
All right, next up here, bad bots drive annual surge in account takeover attacks. A report released this week by the security firm Imperva shows that malicious bots now account for 1/3 of total internet traffic, 30% of all API attacks in 2023, and bots in general, not just malicious bots, account for about 50% of all internet traffic. Nani Singh, the general manager of application security at Imperva, reminded the public that bots are capable of things like web scraping, account takeovers, spam, denial of service, and data exfiltration, and will soon surpass the proportion of internet traffic coming from humans. It sounds like we're already at parity from this report. So Dan, are bots as a technology, I guess, given enough coverage in the information security space? Are they slipping by while people are distracted by flashier things like ransomware AI, specifically malicious bots in this case?
Yeah, I think they are. I think they've always been a persistent threat, but I do think that they've been generally lower in terms of the impact to the end user or to consumers.
Mm-hmm.
If they have bots on a social media platform, or that are harvesting ad revenue from a search engine, I don't think that really makes the top of the list in terms of versus like a credit card hijack or a credential hijack. So I do think this is consistently increasing, and I think that AI is probably accelerating some of this. I thought it was interesting that it said that in the report that bad bot traffic originating from residential IPs surged 26%. That's probably representing people who aren't patching their personal laptops and personal machines,
Mm-hmm.
and bots are conscripting those devices and kind of turning that into their own bot farm.
Yeah, and we also covered this week the Cloudflare DDoS report, which was finding, at least from their perspective, 80% increases in when we're talking about DDoS attacks on the year.
Yeah,
So it's kind of hand in hand with that. I do think it's interesting. We've heard also a lot about bots playing. I mean, when we talk about web scraping, right? I mean, that's like a primary function of a lot of bots, not just
sure.
malicious ones. And we've seen a lot of talk about that with AI companies doing that, but then also these new breed of Gen AI tools, kind of enabling maybe scale more that we've seen with a lot of these bots than even we've previously seen with just regular old horrible botnets.
Yeah, that's right. Because the old botnets were essentially built upon, were with software that was built upon logic, and now these new bots can be powered by LLMs. So they're actually learning and adapting to a dynamic environment. So it makes them that much more dangerous and that much more scalable.
It makes me think of the scene in Jurassic Park where it goes, well, at least they can't open doors, and then like the bot then now opens the like that like always
Right.
seems to be where the conversation is going. At least they can't do this, and then they're doing that next. We'll
Exactly.
cover that next week. Next up here, speaking of things that continue to seem to crop up, Microsoft breach exposed federal agencies to hacking. We've got more fallout from the corporate email breach that occurred in January. It now appears that Russian state-backed attackers, known as Midnight Blizzard, if they want to sound cool, or Cozy Bear, if they want to sound adorable, obtained passwords and other information that could allow them to breach U.S. agencies. This prompted CISA to issue a rare emergency directive requiring agencies to change stolen credentials and investigate other potential risks. CISA said it's still unclear whether the threat actors actually obtained anything from the exposed agencies. So, Dan, it seems Cozy Bear wasn't just interested in reading emails about themselves after all. That seemed to be the initial narrative that was coming out of this. We spent a lot of time on this show questioning the various problems that Microsoft faces, but maybe we can also look at something equally insidious, and that's the way in which such stories kind of skim across the news cycle. And in general, we will talk about it for a minute and then they kind of go back into the news ether. Would added noise around this story help, or would it simply bring on, I guess, alert fatigue at this point?
I think, well, first of all, I don't think Cozy Bear and Russian state-backed hackers are so vain that they care about what Microsoft thinks of them. So I always thought the original storyline was a bit dubious. I do think that, like, look, we're at a Cold War with some of these nation states, Russia and China and others, and I think they're taking more of a long-term view. So now it's no longer about who has the bigger nuclear stockpile and could we be on the brink of nuclear war. I think that's really shifted into cyber, and I just think this is a continuation of that. I think that these bad actors are opportunistic, and they're going to see what things of value can we harvest, and they probably go in and harvest quite a bit of information, like as they did in this case with some of these U.S. agencies, and then they'll sort through it and see what value they can have. I do find it interesting that CISA said there could be some really important information or sensitive information they got their hands on, but we're not really clear if they actually got anything. So that's a bit curious and concerning to me. But again, I think this goes back to this is like the new Cold War of the 2020s, or the 2000s, maybe, to bring a little more, maybe a little bit longer, going back. But again, I just think that we'll probably see more coming out of this over time. But certainly not. I don't think Microsoft's going to lead with that when they're the ones that have to, essentially report it out to the media.
Yeah, and I definitely, to your point about being a Cold War, at least from my own perception of it, it seems like Russia's invasion of Ukraine was kind of the tipping point of, like, we all knew that this was part of the toolkit of many advanced nation states, the U.S. included, but seeing a major hot war like that, and then seeing that how vital the cyber component of that was, working in lockstep, with some
Right.
of the operations on the ground, really put that into a new perspective for me, and has kind of recontextualized how I'm taking in these stories, for sure.
Definitely. Absolutely.
All right, before we move on with our next story, I want to just give a brief hi to Sean and Christian, who is a first-time live viewer checking out the show, getting involved in the chat. We love seeing new people in there, so if you've ever hesitated, you ever thought, hey, maybe I should check it out, remember, just check us out on YouTube, CISO Series, and you can check out our live stream. Before we move on to our next story, I want to spend a few moments and talk about our sponsor for today, Conveyor. Happy Friday! Are you tired of hearing about Conveyor's AI security review automation software? Well, they'll stop talking about it if you book a call. Ready to give the market-leading AI for security questionnaires a spin? Try a free proof of concept at conveyor.com. And don't forget to mention this podcast for 5 free... Hold on just 1 second, guys. My screen went totally blank, and that's not good. Apologize, technical snafu. I don't know what's going on with my screen, so I'm just gonna go over here. Sorry about that. Technical difficulty. I don't know if this is... Sorry. I may have to switch my camera real quick. Sorry about this, everybody. And just do a quick switcheroo, and we'll be back with the show in just a second. Sorry about that. All right. 1 second, gents. This is the joy of live production. All right. And let me just take that up there. And let me switch over my camera so I'm staring at everybody. Sorry about that. Okay. All right. All right, and I'm going to take it, we'll give the ad another read here at the very end. Don't forget to mention this podcast for 5 free questionnaire credits when you purchase a pro plan. All right, next up here, Roku says 576,000 accounts compromised in latest security breach. Roku announced Friday that 576,000 Roku accounts were compromised in a cyber attack it suffered last month. Accounts were compromised by a credential stuffing attack in which malicious actors used the access to make unauthorized purchases of streaming subscriptions and other Roku products. Roku has notified impacted customers, reset their passwords, and enabled 2FA for all accounts. So, Dan, here we see the end result of maybe a lax attitude toward data breaches, where PII and email addresses are stolen, things we've become kind of numb to over the years, having a very real impact. It appears that the standard 2 years of credit monitoring, also offered by many organizations in situations like this, did not stop malicious actors from causing some real damage here. We can only hope, they're maybe taking in some old movies and watching them at home right now. I'm curious, what's your take on this?
So I think the 1 year or 2 year credit monitoring because you lost your credentials in the Home Depot breach 10 years ago, those days are over. When your credentials are lost, they're lost. I actually think this story should be more about IoT devices not staying up to speed with current security practices. So as an example, why didn't Roku force all of their users into MFA when that has been, the gold standard for over 5 years now, and it's been very widespread. So I think, again, this is more of an IoT shortcoming where Roku didn't think of it. So like, well, what value could they have if they break into Roku? Can't be that valuable. But then to realize, listen, people will always reuse credentials. Remembering a password for all the things you have to log into is very difficult. And so people just have had that password since 1998, and we're going to continue to use it. And so I think, again, it's really a failure on Roku's part not to have enabled two-factor authentication prior to that.
Well, and especially because when we're thinking about IoT, this is one of the few IoT devices that's almost certainly going to have some sort of payment information associated with it, right? Like I mean, it's bad to have like your smart thermostat or your router or something like that. I mean, there's all sorts of horrors that could happen if those are compromised, but particularly with that, there's literally, a credit card potentially sitting right on there as well. So yeah,
that's right. That's right.
At least they didn't make the 23andMe mistake of blaming their users explicitly for this and trying to shade off any responsibility. It's still not a great look that you weren't enforcing mandatory 2FA, but at least we're getting there. Progress is progress. Next up here, one of my favorite stories of the week, Sandworm Link Group tied to attack on water utilities. A new report from Mandiant suggests that attacks on water utility systems in the U.S., France, and Poland can be linked to the threat group Sandworm, suspected to be part of Russia's GRU military intelligence agency. These attacks had been previously associated with the cyber army of Russia, which didn't have any known affiliation with Sandworm. Analysts note that Sandworm previously has never hit U.S. networks with disruptive cyber attacks, but this also comes at a time when Sandworm itself is changing tactics, moving from what has typically been done with opportunistic disruptions to more coordinated attacks. So Dan, Russian strategy has always been one in which causing chaos is a primary goal, seems to continue to be on that course. We have seen repeated examples of vulnerability within our own infrastructure, all of which is well known to our adversaries. A population of people that lacks electricity and water can be a very dangerous thing. CISA have made many attempts to draw public and industry attention to this. I'm curious, how do you feel that this kind of awareness campaign is going?
I mean, I hate to be the pessimist here, but I think until we have another, major attack on a piece of infrastructure, I think, the most recent one probably would have been, depending on how you view the Change Healthcare attack, but certainly the Colonial Pipeline in 2021. I think that something bad like that's going to have to happen, where we may actually lose some life. Again, this goes back to the earlier story, where again, this is part of the Cold War, and I would say that there's no persistent threat actor group in Russia that does not operate without the either implicit or explicit permission of the government, just because of the way that country is run. So Sandworm actually, they've attacked utility capabilities before. I think, if I'm not mistaken, they've attacked Ukraine's power grid, I think once in 2015, once in 2016, once in 2022. So this is right in their wheelhouse. And again, if you don't have water, if you don't have electricity, you're putting, people's lives at stake. And again, I just think this is like, more of the same coming from groups like that.
Sean Kelly in our chat says it's only a matter of time before we have a really bad outcome from these type of attacks. I'm curious. I mean, a lot of times in conversations of cybersecurity, right, it is a matter of eventualities, right? Like we're never going to prevent everything. It's a matter of, graceful failure for a lot of these things. And it just doesn't seem like we're necessarily seeing that with some of these infrastructure attacks. That being said, we have seen attacks that have attempted to do very horrible things, releasing lye into the water system or something like that.
Sure.
And that there have been systems in place that have prevented that. But yeah, Sean, to your point, I definitely, it definitely feels that is a point of emphasis for threat actors that is still unappreciated, I guess, by the industry.
Yeah, it's unappreciated, but also like some of these utilities also rely on SCADA technology, which doesn't have a ton of security, but also doesn't have maybe as many exploits as, say, like a SaaS capability would. So there could be some security through maybe caveman type of capabilities. But as they try to modernize some of that, and they don't, take a comprehensive view of, the new modern capabilities that they're trying to bring online to allow people to access these things more remotely and operate them more efficiently, that's where we're going to start running into problems with some of that. So again, I think it's going back to the whole, Cold War type of situation that we find ourselves in.
All right, our next story here. Police bust reveals sophisticated phishing as a service platform. Police from numerous countries have arrested 37 people and seized websites all related to the use of a phishing as a service technology called LabHost that offered phishing pages that target banks and other businesses located mostly in Canada, the US, and the UK. According to Trend Micro, LabHost is designed to replicate banks, government entities, and other major organizations, deceiving users into entering their credentials and two-factor authentication codes. Victims are driven there through phishing campaigns, and the ease of use of LabHost and its integrated and automated campaign management tool called LabRat lowers the barrier of entry for people looking for an easy way into that old phishing business. So, Dan, the interesting thing about this story is that many of the operators of this turnkey phishing platform are university students looking to maybe make a little money and basically thinking they're doing nothing wrong, especially as their actions are believed to be anonymous. I guess it beats waiting tables through grad school. What are your thoughts about this kind of, we're increasingly seeing different types of this kind of turnkey cyber criminal?
Well, a couple of thoughts. I think, one, this is not that much different than ransomware as a service, where, you have bad actor groups basically becoming SaaS companies and selling their product to other bad actors who then in turn operate it. I think for this one, you have some university student, it sounds like that was most of them, who, maybe they're thinking, hey, it's a bank. Their deposits are insured. They'll get the money back. We're just hurting big business or big bank, and it'll help little old me get through college. So I'm not sure what why what the motivation is behind that. But again, I think this whole cybercrime as a service will continue to happen, whether it's ransomware or whether it's in this case phishing as a service. I'm sure there's probably smishing as a service that's out there. We just haven't caught those folks yet. So, again, I just think it's the natural iteration on some of these cyber schemes.
All right, and our last story here, Stanford releases AI Index report. In the 7th edition of the AI Index, the university has found AI currently surpassing human performance on things like image classification, visual reasoning, and English comprehension, but lags in planning, common sense reasoning, and advanced mathematics, so basically sounds like my 3rd grade parent-teacher conference. It also found a lack of serious standardized evaluations for AI responsibility across the industry, despite huge increases in investment in that technology. However, it also highlighted research showing productivity gains using AI and as a potential way to bridge the skills gap between workers. So, Dan, a big report here. It is no surprise to see kind of some ups and downs with the industry as fast moving as this and as wide ranging as it now is. Do you have any further observations, kind of from these top level findings of this report?
I mean, I think it's unsurprising. I think from a security point of view, as organizations are wrestling with how do we implement AI so we can improve our business, how can we move faster, how can we stay ahead of our competition who's also using AI? I think it comes down to, what should the governance model be around that? I do think one thing that's interesting is one thing that's lacking from AI is the shared responsibility model. So you have this in the cloud infrastructure industry, as an example. If you have AWS or Azure, they clearly list out, here's what the cloud provider is responsible for. Here's what you are responsible as the consumer or as the user of this technology. And we're not really seeing a lot of that with AI. It's actually much more loose than I would have expected it to be. But I think that as AI breaches come up, as mistakes are made, as artificial intelligence makes mistakes, which it will invariably do, we'll start to see some of that emerge. But again, the governance around all this stuff is always lagging, and that's just the way it is.
Yeah, the closest I think we've come with AI is a lot of the larger, when it comes to image generation at least, kind of getting ahead of the copyright claims and saying we'll take liability, right? We're going to tell you that there's no copyright on the images we're producing, and we'll take liability if those, if someone tries to sue you. That's about as close I think as we are getting. But yeah, but also to your point with the cloud, I mean, I can still remember, not that, I guess not that long ago, 2016, 2017, of very basic conversations about what is the responsibility of a cloud provider when it comes to, like backup replication, like a lot of the back end IT systems as well. Like that understanding of that, there was still very much a lag back then. So I can only imagine, even as in a more nascent state with AI, if we'll have some of those questions specifically around cybersecurity as well. So some really good points there for sure. Before we get out of here, want to thank all of our commenters in there. We had this great comment from CCL. I'm sorry I didn't get to this at the time, but they were positing that all services should integrate with Have I Been Pwned and prevent users from reusing compromised passwords, whether it's Have I Been Pwned or another service like that. I don't think it's a bad idea, CCL. If nothing else, I still maintain this: when you visit your family for holidays, sign them all up for Have I Been Pwned and give them that report. It's the worst and best Christmas holiday present you could ever give someone. This is my standing recommendation. But thanks to Sean, thanks to CCL, thanks to Christian, thanks to David Spark for being in there, and David Cross, all the Davids as well, for showing up in the chat. Truly, truly appreciated. Before we get out of here, for you, Dan, was there any story that was a thumbs up or an eye roller for you?
Yeah, I think the Roku breach was I think a thumbs up. Again, I think it's just doubling down on I think we have to assume that these new, we'll call it IoT or this new technology, where people don't traditionally associate security with it, that we just need to continue to double down on that. I mean, they lost over 500,000 accounts because over 500,000 people reuse their credentials. So I think that's still a pretty eye-popping number for 2024, and I think it's just a really good reminder to for organizations to continue focusing on the basics.
Absolutely, and to CCL's point, little Have I Been Pwned integration, maybe save some pain down the road for them for sure.
That's right.
All right, Dan, where can people find you on the cyberspace if they are so inclined to follow you out there?
I'm on LinkedIn, Dan Walsh CISO, and one question I always get is, am I hiring? And the answer is yes. We are hiring a security operations engineer. So I'd love to hear from you all. And we would love for you to come work at Paxos.
Excellent. Well, Dan Walsh, the CISO at Paxos, the person that would know the best about those roles. Thank you so much once again for being on the show. Just really fantastic conversation. And I truly appreciate your time. This was a blast.
Thanks for having me, Rich. Appreciate it.
Thanks also to our sponsor for today, Conveyor, market-leading AI for automating customer security reviews. Also, thanks to everyone in our audience today. We love to seeing you coming back here week after week, giving us great comments, giving us great ideas, CCL in particular, and new timers like Christian coming in there. Really appreciate that. So we hope you can join us in the coming weeks for another Week in Review show. Remember, next week we're going to be having Super Cyber Friday, all about hacking your cybersecurity career. Definitely something I think pretty much anyone listening here can probably get something out of. And then we'll have another Week in Review show later that day. And remember, you can still get your daily news fix through cybersecurity headlines every single day. Give us 6 minutes and we'll get you all caught up. Until the next time we meet, I'm Rich Stroffolino, reminding you to have a super sparkly day.
Cybersecurity headlines are available every weekday. Head to CISOSeries.com for the full stories behind the headlines.